we'll get this out of the way right away so that Kevin won't make me crazy. Charlie was a lamb. Okay? There's no doubt about that. He joined the club in 1925, the same year that he made the gold rush. Now, this is not a crowd that needs any introduction to Charlie Chaplin. In 66 silent movies between 1914 and 1936, Chaplin, as the little tramp, found himself in desperate situations. He survived on a shoestring in the gold rush. He got chewed up by monkeys in the circus. He adopted and raised an abandoned child as his own son in The Kid. On screen, Chaplin was resourceful and resilient, and so popular, he became one of the richest men in Jazz Age America and one of the most recognizable men in the world. Chaplin had a formula for his movies. In his autobiography, he says, "My means of contriving comedy plot was simple. It was the process of getting people in and out of trouble." But the problem is, in real life, Chaplin got himself into trouble, and he didn't know how to get out of it. Why? Why did this happen? Well, for starters, Chaplin was handsome, charming, and as you can see, unrecognizable without his tramp costume. He was catnip to women and reckless in his assignations. His first two marriages were at the end of a shotgun, and he fell in love with most of his leading ladies. This is one of the pictures from the Lambs Club. This was his first leading lady, Edna Purviance. Beginning in 1915, when she was 19, they made their first of 33 movies together. Wow. Some published accounts say that Chaplin slept with 2,000 women over the course of his life. Well, let me tell you something. If that's true, he should have stopped at 1,999, because my book is about Chaplin and that one woman. She was a pistol-packing protege, disappointed at being dumped by him. She ignited the fuse that exploded all over Chaplin. Her story is usually relegated to a few pages in Chaplin biographies. This is the first book to look at her and her legal woes that engulfed both herself and Chaplin. She was a Brooklyn stenographer by the name of Mary Louise Gribble. She was transformed by Chaplin into Hollywood's Joan Barry. Their relationship moved from the movie set to the bedroom and on to the courtroom, and it upended both of their lives. Flora Belle Muir was the New York Daily News crime reporter assigned to the Los Angeles bureau of the paper. She broke the Chaplin story, and I love this quote because she explains it better than anybody. "You don't have to be a genius in Hollywood to fall afoul of your normal allotment of traps and snares, but if you're a genius worth $20 million or more, if you have a roving fancy and can afford to indulge it, you're almost a cinch to be headed for the front page." And that's exactly what happened. Tim Durant, who was a former stockbroker, who was the ex-husband of E.F. Hutton's daughter. Let me tell you, everybody in Jazz Age America is in this story. He became Chaplin's friend, tennis partner, fixer, future co-defendant, and had a much simpler explanation for what ailed Chaplin. He's an artist. He has no common sense. Okay, so what happened? For 3 years in the mid-1940s, Chaplin and Barry were at the center of a legal drama that knocked Hitler right off the front pages of newspapers around the world. Egged on by the press, federal prosecutors filed 4 indictments against Chaplin. 1 for transporting Joan Barry across state lines for immoral purposes in violation of the 1910 Mann Act, known as the White Slave Law. That law barred men from transporting women, however willing, across state lines for sex. 3 additional indictments charged Chaplin, Durant, and others, including a judge, we have a group of judges here, a judge, Beverly Hills police officers, all of whom they alleged conspired to violate Joan's civil rights by running her out of California to keep a lid on a sex scandal that Chaplin was afraid would ruin him. And if that weren't enough, Barry accused Chaplin of fathering her out-of-wedlock daughter, Carol Ann, born in 1943, and more lawsuits followed. At its core, this is a juicy story of old Hollywood, but it's more. What happened to this poor guy? What is this story really about? It's about the power of celebrity. It's about how law trails science. It's about the real weaponization of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. It's about the media frenzy around trials of the rich and famous. And it's about how women have always been exploited in Hollywood. To understand how Chaplin and Joan ended up in this mess, we need to understand where they came from. Chaplin was born in 1889 in London to English vaudevillians. His father drank himself to death at age 37. His mother lost her mind. As she cycled through insane asylums, Chaplin and his older half-brother Sidney cycled through orphanage schools. They survived by joining the Fred Carno comedy troupe. In 1912, that troupe toured America. Silent film director Max Sennett, father of the Keystone Cop comedies, saw Chaplin on stage right up the street at the American Theater on 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, offered him a $125 a week movie deal. Chaplin jumped at it, but he quickly outgrew slapstick. He started his own studio, he was one of the founders of United Artists, and he made millions. Who's Joan? Joan is born in 1920 to a working-class family. Her paternal grandmother committed suicide by blowing out a gas lamp and inhaling. Her father shot himself to death with a handgun in her home when Joan was 6. Her stepfather was a grifter and a criminal. Her mother was a pious Catholic who liked her liquor and dominated her daughter. Is it any wonder Joan wanted to escape? Inspired by movie magazines and daydreams, she longed to be discovered for pictures. She had fiery red hair, a beautiful figure, some innate acting ability, but crooked teeth and a terrible New York accent. Despite these deficiencies, she made her way to Hollywood after high school, where many, many rich and powerful men besides Chaplin were drawn to her, like this one. She had a relationship with oil tycoon J. Paul Getty. His diaries talk of 100 encounters with her in Los Angeles, Mexico, and Tulsa between 1940 and 1942. Those diaries are silent about whether their relationship was sexual. He denied it was. He was on his 5th wife at the time, so maybe that's why he denied it was. But the FBI never believed him. Chaplin's lawyers tried, but failed to pin Joan's pregnancy on him. She also had a relationship with Getty's lawyer, a guy named David Hecht. She met him while cavorting with Getty in Mexico in 1941. Hecht was a very dapper man about town. He lived at the Pierre Hotel, which was owned by Getty. Joan had a relationship with this guy, Sam Marks. He was an MGM producer, seen here with his wife Marie, who was a Ziegfeld Folly girl. Marks was a distant cousin of Joan's by marriage. He produced the Lassie and the Andy Hardy movies. Joan tried to get cousin Sam to give her a movie contract. He considered it seriously, but MGM refused to pay for an orthodontist and addiction coach, so that ended that. Joan had a relationship with this guy, Hans Rausch. He was a wealthy international race car driver. Chaplin's lawyers tried to say he was the father of her child too, but they didn't prevail in that either. And finally, Joan also had a relationship with Judge J.F.T. O'Connor. He was a federal judge appointed by Roosevelt. But Joan claimed they only spent one day together at his apartment, and at her insistence, they kept the door open for the entire duration of the date. Joan wanted a wealthy and powerful man to protect her, and not surprisingly, given her family history, she was trouble. She was a prescription drug and alcohol abuser. She probably suffered from bipolar disorder, as well as ADHD, and she made several suicide attempts, some faked for attention and some real. Now, Chaplin was given to his own wild mood swings, combining frenetic movie making with long spells of depression. He and Joan met in May 1941, when he was at a low point. His long relationship with Paulette Goddard, another of his leading ladies, had just ended. Silent films ended too, and with them, the screen life of the little tramp. He spent most of his time on the tennis court with Durant. Now, Tim Durant plays an outsized role here. The FBI had a very low opinion of him. They considered him to be Chaplin's pimp. Durant took umbrage at that. He told them, "My primary function in Chaplin's life is to keep women away from him." Nonetheless, Chaplin met Joan on a blind date arranged by Durant. She was 21, Chaplin was 52. Within weeks, she dumped Getty, she signed a contract with Chaplin Studios, and she was sleeping with the boss. Within a few more weeks, she became pregnant. Durant arranged for her abortion. Meanwhile, Chaplin got her teeth fixed, he enrolled her in drama school, he bought a script for her movie debut. But soon, another pregnancy, another abortion. After this one, Chaplin tired of Joan as a romantic partner. He didn't want another shotgun marriage. He tried to retreat to a professional relationship, but Joan fancied herself in love. And like the Glenn Close character in Fatal Attraction, Joan would not be ignored. She threw tantrums. When Chaplin wouldn't take her phone calls, she broke into his Beverly Hills mansion. In September 1942, she suddenly announces to Chaplin that she wanted to go home to New York to get married. She did this to make him jealous. It backfired. He couldn't buy her a ticket fast enough. He tossed in a few $100 extra. Bye, Joan. Good luck. Now, Chaplin has been on the FBI's radar screen since 1922 for his supposed connection to communism. There is a 2,000-plus page FBI file on him, and it's filled with rumor and guilt by association. But during World War II, Chaplin traveled around the country giving speeches urging the United States to open a second front to assist the Russians in fighting the Nazis. In other words, he wanted an early D-Day invasion. The communists were all for it, the Allies were not ready to do it, and the United States government did not like the fact that he was running around talking about this. In October 1942, 1 month after Joan left to supposedly get married in New York, Chaplin appears at Madison Square Garden to make a highly publicized second front speech. Joan shows up with David Hecht on her arm. While in New York, she and Chaplin have dinner, and they probably slept together. She complained she was broke. He gave her $300. Without much else to do, Joan makes her way back to California, where she continues to stalk Chaplin, until in November 1942, around the time Chaplin met 17-year-old Una O'Neill, he tells Joan to get lost for good. Joan is furious. Shortly before Christmas, 1942, she breaks into Chaplin's house at midnight with a pistol, threatening to kill him and herself. Okay? Chaplin diffused the situation in the worst way possible, folks. He sleeps with her. Had he simply picked up the phone next to his bed and called the cops, he would have avoided the entire disaster that followed. But he was so afraid of the scandal that he thought would erupt if the papers found out Joan was in his house at midnight with a gun, that he made matters worse. The next morning, she leaves. Everything's good and fine, but her visit freaked him out. He hired a night watchman. On New Year's Eve 1942, Joan shows up to ring in the New Year with Chaplin. He's out ringing it in with somebody else. She breaks into his house. But inside, there's not Charlie who's going to sleep with her. There's the night watchman who's going to call the cops. As she realizes this is what's about to happen, she leaps out Chaplin's bathroom window and she runs back to the apartment of Hans Roosh. She gets an idea. She takes a few sleeping pills. She rubs her lips with iodine. She puts on a pair of Hans's pajamas. She covers them up with her silver fox coat that Chaplin had given her. And she crawls outside to the back seat of a parked convertible, where she makes believe she's at death's door. Her friend, Elaine Barrymore, you all know her, the fourth ex-wife of John Barrymore, calls the police and the press to report there's a dying woman in a car. This was another attempt. This is real. This is crazy, right? This is another attempt to get Chaplin's attention. The police come. They determine right away that Joan's a faker. She gets arrested for vagrancy. While she's in jail on New Year's Day, awaiting arraignment, she thinks Chaplin is going to come and rescue her. Instead, he sends a stooge named Robert Arden, who is a radio talk show host, whose name is not Robert Arden at all. He's an illegal alien named Rudolph Kliegler. We have no idea who this guy is. And neither did the government. Is he a refugee from Hitler? Is he a communist plant? What's he doing in Chaplin's orbit? Whatever he's doing, he's in a police precinct on New Year's Day waving around money and a message from Chaplin. Can you do the little tramp a favor and run this little tramp out of town? Could the cops please talk privately to the judge and see if you can arrange that? That's exactly what happens. Without appointing Joan counsel, even though California law at the time required it, the judge, another future federal co-conspirator, accepts her guilty plea to vagrancy, gives her a 90-day jail sentence, but offers to suspend it if Joan would leave town. Alone and scared, she takes the plea and she leaves in January 1943. 5 months later, Joan reappears, 5 months pregnant. She demands that Chaplin marry her or pay her $150,000, which is about $2.5 million today. He refuses. Joan exacts her revenge. She tattles to Hedda Hopper, who hates Chaplin's politics and his guts. Hopper and tells Flora Belle-Muir, her good friend, and the two of them blow the Joan and Charlie story wide open. Now, these two have a lot of fans, including this guy. Oh, by the way, this is the story. They blow the store wide open. That's Chaplin, Paulette Goddard, and Tim Durant at the opening of The Great Dictator in 1940, a file photo. But that's the first story ever published about this. Mata B, 23, jailed, blames Charles Chaplin. Okay, here's a big fan of theirs, J. Edgar Hoover. He sends a note to the agent in charge of the Los Angeles FBI field office and says, shouldn't we run this down? Immediately, 5,000 FBI agents fan out across the country. They interview 130 witnesses or suspects, and the tsunami erupts. Next thing you know, a new United States attorney, the young and ambitious Charles Carr, gets a grand jury to vote 4 indictments against Chaplin. The Sexy Man Act case goes to trial first. It's based on the fact that Chaplin paid for Joan to travel to New York in September 1942, and then had sex with her there a month later, and then gave her $300 in New York, which the government claimed he did, so she could come back to California where they could resume their sexual relationship. Journalists from around the world descend on the courthouse. These are all the reporters. They took a group picture after the trial was over. It's amazing. Every one of these people covered this trial. All right? Now, the federal players. Here's Charles Carr in the front. There's Chaplin, looking kind of handsome in his day. Next to him is Jerry Giesler. Jerry Giesler was the famous and famously expensive defense lawyer in California, known as, quote, the magnificent mouthpiece. He represented big men in big trouble. A year earlier, he had gotten Earl Flynn acquitted on statutory rape charges. Now, the presiding judge, you know this guy, folks. The judge, this is the presiding judge at trial, one of Joan's beaux. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. He never revealed that fact, even as Joan sat 2 feet away from him testifying in court. He was introduced to Joan by another witness at the trial, J. Paul Getty. And he never tells any of the players and none of the lawyers that he had any connection to Getty either. All right? Now, the initial press in this was very anti-Chaplin. Women who once waited in line for hours to see the latest Little Tramp movie now lined the courthouse halls, hissing, booing, screaming, rat. They swatted Chaplin with rolled-up newspapers as he was walking into court. However, at trial, here's Joan after she testified. Her story quickly fell apart under cross-examination, under Giesler's expert cross-examination. Chaplin follows with his own star turn on the witness stand, weeping appropriately as he talks about Joan showing up at his house at midnight with her gun. There was no case here. Joan left California a month before Chaplin went to New York. He didn't seek her out when he went to New York. She didn't use the money Chaplin gave her in New York to go to California. You know what she did with it? She went to visit Getty in Oklahoma with it. He gave her the money to go to California, probably because he wanted to get her out of his hair. Okay? The jury in the courtroom and the jury of public opinion turned back in favor of Chaplin. When he was acquitted on April 4th, 1944, the courtroom erupted in cheers, and the public and the jurors and the United States attorney who indicted him all lined up to shake his hand. The Department of Justice, humiliated by this defeat, told Carr, drop the remaining 3 conspiracy indictments. Frankly, in my view, they were the stronger cases, but they're just not as sexy. But we're not through yet. Joan's baby was born on October 2nd, 1943. Chaplin, who, remember, wasn't going to give her a dime when she first showed up, now starts doing the math, okay, and counts back to the night that Joan showed up in the house with the gun. All of a sudden, he agrees to give her $15,000 until the baby's born and until a blood test can be performed. They agree. If the child's his, he'll continue to support her. If not, she can keep the $15,000 and they'll go their separate ways, okay? Well, high school biology time. Mom's blood is A. Baby's blood is B. And Chaplin's blood is O. Let's hear it from the studio audience. Is this Chaplin's baby? No. Very good. Very good. Okay. But Joan, egged on by her mother, doesn't walk away as promised. Mom arrives in town. She goes to the local Catholic church. She gets a pious lawyer to represent her pro bono. And here we go. Paternity trial. All right? Now, Tim Durant insisted years later this all could have been avoided if Chaplin had just thrown Joan a little bit more money. But Chaplin was known to be a cheapskate, and he refused. He'd already been hit with a $60,000 bill from Giesler for the criminal trial, which is about $1 million today. And so, not only was he not giving Joan any money, but he wasn't using Giesler this time. He gets his United Artists corporate lawyers to handle the paternity trial. A big mistake. The United Artists lawyers were corporate lawyers, and they were no match for Joseph Scott, also known as Mr. Los Angeles for his many church and civic activities. Okay. That's Mr. Los Angeles. He had been a famous trial lawyer in his day. In 1911, he and Clarence Darrow together represented the McNamara brothers who blew up the LA Times building in a labor dispute, killing 21 people. As an aside, Mr. Los Angeles was 78 years old when he handled the Charlie Chaplin paternity case, but he was played by the 40-something James Woods in the movie Chaplin that starred Robert Downey Jr. in the title role. And this is another example of Hollywood realism. Okay? Shockingly, despite the fact that you all know this isn't Chaplin's kid, a jury found that Chaplin was the child's father. Everybody ran up to the California Supreme Court. Now, I warn the Bronx judges, this is not Yankee Stadium. This is, although it looks just like it, this is the California Supreme Court in San Francisco, okay? After a futile appeal, Chaplin ends up paying $100 a week for 21 years to another guy's child. Joan appealed too, complaining that that's not enough money from a millionaire. But the California Supreme Court, disgusted with the verdict, left the dollar amount alone. What went wrong here? Well, there were two paternity trials. The first ended in a hung jury. At that trial, Mr. Los Angeles called Chaplin a gray-haired old buzzard, a cheap Cockney cad, and a runt of a Svengali. Chaplin was so ticked off that he skipped most of the retrial. But his lawyers, knowing the effect that Chaplin had on women, had packed the jury with 11 of them. And they were disappointed and insulted that he didn't show up, and it showed in their verdict. Now, while the public may have been happy that the womanizing Chaplin got his comeuppance, the legal profession was appalled. Within a few years, California and every other state amended their laws to require that a paternity case be automatically dismissed when a blood test proved that a litigant could not be the father of a subject child. Too late for Chaplin, but he's the reason. As America turns to the right in the 1950s, the government's looking for scalps, and Chaplin's was a prominent one. In September 1952, he went to London for the premiere of his latest movie, Limelight. Like all non-citizens who leave the country, he needed a re-entry permit to return, and the government granted it. But Uncle Sam pulled a double-cross. It revoked it once Chaplin was out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on the Queen Elizabeth. There was no legal basis. There was no legal basis to exclude Chaplin. He had not been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, and he was not a member of the Communist Party. But Chaplin did not show the tenacity of cinema's little tramp. Had he challenged this, he likely would have won. Instead, he died in Switzerland in 1977. Joan continued to unravel mentally. In 1953, she was committed to a California mental hospital where she remained for a decade. Her little girl, Carol Ann, saw her only 2 more times in her life. One time was this day, when she went to visit her on the grounds of the mental hospital and took a picture of her. She looks okay. Carol Ann was placed in a convent school. And although Mr. Los Angeles was mean to Chaplin, he loved Carol Ann like his own granddaughter, and she loved him. She would visit him at his law office. She'd get all dressed up, go with her grandmother, and she would visit him, okay? He protected her. He ensured that she got a good education, and he made sure that every nickel that Chaplin gave her was accounted for. And when she turned 21, she got a lot of money. She's now 81. She lives out west. She cooperated with this book, as did her half-brother, because they wanted me to find the mother that they lost track of. I found Joan. She died in a Brooklyn nursing home in 2007 at the age of 87. She was buried in an unmarked grave in Morganville, New Jersey. And in the 18 years she's been in the ground there, she's had exactly 2 visitors, me and Carol Ann's half-brother. Now, since her death, Joan has found her way into showbiz. For about 4 months in 2012, there was a play, Chaplin the Musical. Joan is played by Emily Dupre, and Jen Colella plays, Joan very pregnant, and Jen Colella plays, you can see the hat, Hedda Hopper. With Charlie and Joan, the bottom line is each was a victim and each was a victimizer. Joan was a threatening and potentially dangerous stalker. But she was also fragile and troubled. Durant and others warned him that she was unstable. But Chaplin, proving he had no common sense and following his pattern with leading ladies, plunged ahead. He promised Joan stardom and love, and she got neither. When he tired of her, he used the power of his celebrity to get rid of her. And Joan was powerless to stop it. For all of her flaws, she symbolizes how women are fungible in Hollywood, and they have been since the first movie was made there in 1910 by D.W. Griffith. Chaplin came back to America one last time, in 1972 to get a special Oscar. His return was facilitated by Bob Hope, who lobbied the United States ambassador to Switzerland to convince Attorney General John Mitchell to let him come back. Now, it's odd that a conservative Republican like Hope would go to bat for Charlie, but Hope got his start in showbiz by winning a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest as a child. So there was a place in his heart for Chaplin. And here is Chaplin when he got his Oscar. At the time, he's here on the stage with Una, who he ended up marrying, having 8 children with. He got his Oscar and the longest standing ovation in Academy history. Ask yourself, would he get that today, given how Hollywood has embraced the Me Too movement? Or at least it did for a while. It's not entirely clear. Now at the end of the Oscar show, the orchestra struck up and played the song Smile, which Chaplin wrote for the movie Modern Times and for his then great love, leading lady Paulette Goddard. Now, in our audience tonight, we have David Oswald, who is the leader of the Louis Armstrong Eternity Band. He plays every Wednesday night in Birdland. I don't care how they played it. This guy does it better. Thank you.
We'll take some questions.
Oh, let me see. I don't know how to stop this. Let's see. Oh, very good.
I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for coming tonight and for all of your service to the city of New York. But how did you find Joan?
How did I find Joan?
Yes.
Oh, the good old-fashioned way, sitting home in my pajamas during COVID, going through Ancestry.com. I found, I knew that Joan from newspapers had married a man named Russell Seck after her Chaplin relationship. And through a lot of hunt and peck, I found a man named Stephen Seck. I called him cold. I asked him if his sister was the Chaplin baby. And he said, why do you want to know? And I told him what I was doing, and he offered to call his sister and see if his sister would speak with me. And she was very reluctant. I sent her a copy of a book I had written previously about a civil rights leader. She read it. She said, well, I'll talk to you. I'm not sure I'll cooperate, but we'll talk. And then she became like my new best friend. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
Was it ever found out who the real father was?
Well, that's interesting. The answer is no, but if you look at the evidence, and first of all, she spent about 28 of 30 days in December of 1942 at the apartment of Hans Roosch. Number one. Number two, she spent a considerable amount of time with Getty during December and January. Now, we have an obstetrician here. If you have, I mean, can you have if you're with somebody in January, can you have a baby on October 2nd?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, you have to look at the little wheel. Okay. All right. She also spent time with Hep. The bottom line is she had a number of these boyfriends, but remember, every single one of them told the FBI, I never slept with her. And she told the FBI she never slept with any of them. So the only person she said she slept with was Chaplin. But we know that that's impossible.
But in recent years, they haven't done the DNA.
Well, the only way to do that would be if the Chaplin baby would agree to take a DNA test. I spoke with her about this, and the reason she doesn't want to do it is because she doesn't want anybody to know who she is or where she is. She cooperated with me. I could use her first name. I could say she lives out west, and that's all I'm allowed to say. If she does the 23andMe or the Ancestry test, in order to connect to your ancestors, you have to make yourself known. Otherwise, they can't connect with you. She doesn't want to do that.
And she's still alive.
She's 81 years old. She's still alive. She's fine. Yes?
2 questions. One, you started writing this when you were on the bench. Why this story? And the second, did you speak to any of the Chaplin heirs? He has a lot of kids.
Okay. First question. I discovered this story in the most boring, deadly way. I was updating, I've written a series of domestic violence textbooks. That's the area of the law I worked in. And it was time to update my textbook. So you know how you diddle around the internet and way leads on to way? I find this 1952 article, a law review article, about the injustice of the Chaplin trial and paternity law. I'm like, what? And I start reading it, and in this very dull law review article are about 3 chapters about this great injustice that he paid for 21 years for a kid that's not his. And that made me, so I'm like, I never heard of this. And I started looking at some of the biographies, and I saw that there's always about a chapter in each biography about this, but nobody ever went into it in any great detail, and I thought it was a great legal story. As to the Chaplins, I made 3 attempts to enlist the Chaplins in working with my book through their lawyer who is in Paris. At the time, 7 of the 8 surviving Chaplins are the trustees, if you will, of the Chaplin archive. And nobody gets near that archive unless those gatekeepers let you in. They took it to a vote. And 6 of the 7 said, tell her to get lost. And one, because of they thought it would desecrate their mother's memory. 1 was in favor of allowing me in, the youngest one, who then sent me an email. English is not her first language, French is, and I had a difficult time understanding it. So my significant other, whose first language is French, I said, charm her, send her a letter in French. Lay on the French blarney, you know. And it didn't work, thank you. It didn't work. Then 2 years later, you know, sometimes, my agent is also here tonight, and she reminds me that sometimes over time, people warm up, you know. So I tried again 2 years later. It was like, nope. Not only that, they wouldn't even give me a picture out of the archive to be able to use. I mean, they wanted no part of me. Yes?
Yeah, another slight connection with us is that Hedda Hopper's husband was a lamb, and I think his portrait is on the wall.
DeWolf Hopper. He became famous. He used to go on stage and recite Casey at the Bat, right? That was his big thing. In between also sleeping with as many women apparently as Charlie Chaplin, because I think that's why they got divorced. Yes, Allison.
When you were researching this book and writing this book, in terms of the audience that you most wanted to capture, are you thinking about how women are portrayed in this story? Are you thinking about the law? Of course you are, but what is it that you were most trying to excavate and expose?
I think every Chaplin biography, and there's a grain of truth to this, talks about this man being railroaded and by the fact that he was a left-leaning thinker and we had a very conservative government, and that everything that happened to him was horribly unfair. And again, there is some truth to that. I don't deny that. But I felt that this woman had a story to tell. And when I started reading about how they conspired to push her out of Los Angeles, how she was depicted as nothing but a crackpot, I started thinking, well, was she really such a crackpot, or was she, sort of, did something attribute to that? And I wanted to see whether in this era of the Me Too movement, if there was another way to look at their relationship. There was one police matron in the Beverly Hills Police Department who was interviewed by the FBI when everybody was calling Joan a nut, a nut, a nut. And she said, well, I'm not sure she was so nutty. He just treated her really badly, and she got very, very upset, and who wouldn't? So I just wanted to see what, give some voice to her voice. Although I have to be honest, I can't sugarcoat all the things she did to Chaplin. She broke into his house. She came in with a gun in the middle of the night, and it was loaded. So I really think it took two to tango in this book. Yes.
What did baby Chaplin make of her mother?
Baby Chaplin and her mother have a very complex. First of all, when she was very little, her mother was moving around a lot. She kept taking the kids to Mexico. She kept moving back and she was troubled. She had ADHD. I think she lived in like 19 different apartments over the 2 years that she was in California. So she had a very, very scattered childhood. Once her mother went to the mental institution, she never saw her again. And so she feels very guilty because her grandmother, who was a pious Catholic, tried to make believe Joan was essentially dead to the family. She never and the Chaplin baby has talked to me about this a lot, and it's in the book. She says, why didn't my damn grandmother ever just say, let's go visit your mother today? She was a little girl. She couldn't make that decision herself, and she feels that she lost a lot of valuable relationship time with her mother. And then something else terrible happened. When she graduated from high school at age 18, the mental hospital contacts her and says, oh, your mother's ready to leave now. Can you take her? What 18-year-old who's been living in a convent school is going to be able to take care of a mentally ill woman who she doesn't even know? And she said, well, no, I'm about ready to go to college. I can't do this. And of course, imagine the guilt you feel, that she feels. So
did she take care of her mother then?
She never saw her mother again. Never saw her mother again. She saw her mother twice. The day that picture that I had, I put up, the day of that picture, and her mother showed up at her high school graduation, which made her feel very uncomfortable because nobody tipped her off that mom would be there, and she felt really awkward and didn't know what to say to her. So it's very, it's a very sad relationship. Yes, sir.
Once Chaplin was in Switzerland and figured that he was probably never going to come back to the United States, why did he keep paying? Were they garnishing royalties in Hollywood, or did he feel bound in some way to, why didn't he tell them to get lost?
Judges tell him why he paid. There's a court order, and you don't disobey a court order. Simple as that. There was a, there was a court order, and he paid. Although Mr. Los Angeles, Joe Scott, did go to court and try and get a basically garnish money from Chaplin so that he would be willing to pay, but Chaplin paid through his United Artists lawyers for years. Yes.
Did baby Chaplin have children of her own?
Yeah. Baby Chaplin had 2 children. One son committed suicide. Oh. That's in the book. And her relationship with the daughter, it's okay. All right. Look, mental illness that ran in that family. Fran.
How did she connect with the stepbrother?
When they were little, they were together for about 5 years before, remember, about 5 years. Baby Chaplin's born in 43. Her brothers are born in the late 40s. Joan goes to the mental hospital in 53. So there's about a 5-year period where she has a relationship with her stepbrothers. But once Joan went to the mental hospital, the stepbrothers went back to their biological father. And she tells a harrowing story about being on a platform all dressed up with her stepbrothers, and she thinks they're all going to Pittsburgh, and the boys get on the train and they leave her there. Now let me tell you, this is the reason why, for as much fun as you can make of Mr. Los Angeles, he saved this child's life. He got her away from her wicked grandmother, who was horrible. She only wanted Chaplin's money. He put her in this Ramona convent school, which sounds horrible, but Carol Ann loved it, made friends there. Joe Scott had sent his own children there. And think about how vulnerable this kid was. Scott could have stolen every nickel from her, right? And he saved every nickel for her. And she said when she graduated from college, she had a car, she had beautiful clothes, she was able to start a life because he took care of her. And Chaplin's money, which, again, was negligible to Chaplin, but to a child like this, it was real money. Yes, Robert?
So if Joan got out of the asylum around 63
yes.
So, and she died in the 70s.
No, Joan died in 2007.
Oh, okay, sorry, I had a 7 in my head. Maybe this is a little off topic for you, but do you have any idea of what happened to her between her death and being discharged?
I think she had a couple of marriages, which I tried to find those spouses or whether there were any other children, because when she died under the name Mary Louise Baker. But the reason I am very confident it's her, it's because it's the same date of birth and it's the same Social Security number that she was using for years. So and she went back to Brooklyn where she was born. So yes.
How long did it take you to research this? This is an incredibly complex story.
Well, I would go to work during the day, and then I would come home. George and I would have dinner, and then from 8 to 1 in the morning, I worked on this book. And every vacation, judges in the great state of New York get 5 weeks of vacation. Every vacation, I went to California and did this research, and that's how I did it.
How many years were you doing this?
I started right before COVID is when I put the proposal together. So from 2019 to I turned it in the summer of 2023, so like 4 years. Yes.
How old was Joan? I must have missed that
When
in the beginning.
Oh, in the beginning. She was 21 when she met Chaplin, and he was in his 50s. He was 52.
I know he had a proclivity for teenage girls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joan was kind of old for him.
Yeah.
Joan was a little old for him. Yes.
Can you play the song? It's really beautiful.
As you leave, I will play it. Actually, I'll tell you, you should listen to this song because there's a singer who sings in this song, and his voice is absolutely exquisite. Except, how do I do it? Help me out.
All right, buy the book, guys.
Thank you.